I remember there was one guy, I'm not going to say his name, who was in Elite, and he adamantly would not use any kind of sales script. Oh, I'm better at winging it and stuff. It's fucking nonsense. No one is better winging a sales process than someone who has a script. Now, I don't mean a script as in you sit there and you read it like some kind of robot who's trying to sell hair care products by cold call. I'm not talking about that. It's probably a better word is framework. It's a direction. It's a high-level roadmap of how this call should go. And you need to take it through, just like a sales letter goes through certain stages. A sales call should go through certain stages, or a sales presentation. And you won't be surprised to find they are pretty much the same stages a sales letter goes through. Because after all, a sales letter is really a salesman or woman in print. I've seen recently people saying, there's a new paradigm in marketing. Now, there's always a new fucking paradigm in marketing. Listen to these tits. All right. Oh, social media selling is different. Old school selling doesn't work anymore. Funnels don't work anymore. I've just made 22 grand in sales off a fucking funnel in the last 3 weeks. So I don't think that's true somehow. These people, they don't know what they're talking about. Old school marketing still works. Of course it does, because it's predicated on the way human beings' brains work, their psychology. It'll work as long as we are humans. There might be some changes in style as times change. Selling now is probably very different for most people from how it was in the 1970s and the likes of Zig Ziglar. That's because we've learned more. But fundamentally, it's the same at the core of it. So please don't think there's anything new under the sun. There isn't. You know, it's the same old shit.
Fundamentals of sales and marketing don't change. And sales is literally just a series of steps that you can find through any good piece of marketing and sales that you just take them through over the phone that ends with you getting a yes or a no, much like any other sales or marketing piece. Am I going to do this? Yes or no? And don't say, oh, well, you forgot about the maybes. A maybe is a no.
Unless it comes back as a yes later. But at that moment, you're right. Maybe is a no. Now, there are many ways to do this. In some circumstances, in some calls, I will say, at the end of this call, I'm going to make you an offer, possibly, and I want a yes or a no. Anything but a yes is a no. And if you don't give me a yes or a no, having agreed to it, I will retract the offer. Okay? And if that's not okay, we don't continue with the call. I've done that before. And I've had 2 people at the end of the call, so I need to think about it. So I tell you, I'm going to make it easy. I'm withdrawing my offer. Don't ever try and speak to me again, because you've just lied to me. If you're going to lie to me now, what you're going to be like as a client, off you go. Very strict on that. Anyway, why do we need a script? That's a good question. I'm glad I asked it of myself. The reason we need a script, there's some pretty good reasons. And the first one is consistency. Now, we've just been saying that sales is a process, but a process has a series of steps, and those steps need to be consistent. If they're not consistent, what are they? Random. And that's what happens when you wing it. And the thing about winging it, even with the best intentions, I genuinely believe, people genuinely believe, when they say they're better winging it, they believe that's actually true. They do genuinely think they are. They're not. They're really not. And if anybody was, they would be an extreme outlier, which means by definition, you're listening to this, Mr. fucking podcast listener, the chances are you're not an outlier. Statistically, it's very unlikely. You will not be better winging it. I think the biggest reason people refuse to use a script is their ego. One, it makes it consistent. You have to put this process down. That's hard because you're committing to a certain process then. And the second thing is, and this is why when I say about ego, if you have a consistent process, you are then accountable to it in 2 ways. You're accountable for following the process, and then you're accountable for your results. Now, here's a curious thing. One of the questions I ask on these calls we have, these exploration calls, is how many prospects have you had inquiries in the last month? And how many of those converted to sales? And they'll say, 10. And then probably convert 30 or 40% of them to sales. And then I ask them about the actual numbers they're doing. And the 2 never match up. They are always overestimating because they've not made enough money. Let's say I've closed 30%, I had 10 things. So as I say, you got 3 new clients last month. No, I didn't get that many. You must have done it for what you're telling me is true. If you had 10 inquiries and you convert 30% of them, you must have had 3 new clients. Now you're telling me you're not. They're not lying to me. They're just wrong. They are overestimating their abilities. We all tend to do it. More than half of all drivers believe they're above average as drivers. That cannot be true. We all think we're better than average drivers, and the chances are we're not. In terms of the highway code, I guarantee I'm not. because I've been driving for 40 years, I've forgotten it. In terms of actual skill, quite possibly, I don't know. But certainly not with their adherence to the highway code, definitely not. I'm way below average. So we've got accountability.
You have illegal bricks tied to the bottom of your shoes when you drive, don't you? Just so you can reach the pedals.
Sit on a cushion. Yeah.
Booster seat for 5 to 7-year-olds.
My wife's just a little bit, she's 5'3", she's a bit shorter than me, but both little people. We drive this fuck off big Land Rover. Fucking having to climb into the damn thing.
It's like the reverse clown car.
Yeah. So we've got this, you've got accountability. So that's the second thing. The first thing is consistency. Second thing is accountability. You've got this script, you've got to follow it. And when you get to the end of it, you either get a yes or a no, it's measurable. Well, following from that, it makes it measurable. You can say, I've had 10 calls, I followed the script, and we got 1 conversion. You can actually measure what's working. As you get more experienced at it, you can actually start to measure empirically at what point you're losing people, when they start to go a bit cold or get uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable on the call isn't necessarily a bad thing, because I tell them at the beginning of the call, I'm going to ask you some very uncomfortable questions. Is that okay? That's a different kind of discomfort. But when they become uncomfortable with the whole thing, as this isn't going the way I thought it would go, as opposed to, shit, I don't want to answer this question. They're two different things. Okay, so it becomes measurable. Because it's measurable, it then becomes testable. Because you can find these spots. Okay, we tend to lose people. I can just sense it in the 3rd or 4th segment of the call. Well, let's change it then. Let's try these words instead. Let's try this approach instead. Let's switch things around. For instance, in my particular calls, if I've been asking them questions, well, I am asking them questions, but if I've got to the point where I'm happy that I can help them, and I will say, where do you want to go from here? And I get them to tell me, well, I'd like you to tell me about your experience, the core control experience. Okay, great. And then I switch to a screen presentation of our models. But other people do it different ways. I can change those models around. I can do different models in different orders, and I can edit the models if I want to. It's measurable. And then, of course, it becomes testable. We can test and tweak. You can't do any of this if it's random. Because here's the thing about human memory. You might believe, I kind of wing it, but I know what I'm doing. I always follow a structure. No, you don't. You think you do, but you don't. Human memory is incredibly fallible. There are various books on it. They've done all kinds of research on this. The human memory is fucking terrible. And the thing is, barristers and criminal lawyers know this, and they exploit it for their own purposes. So anyway, you can't remember accurately, because apart from anything else, you're immersed in the call. You've not got mental room to remember it all. And you remember it in the wrong order and things. So if you don't believe me about this, film a video of you and your partner talking one evening. Just stick it in the corner. So, just some innocuous conversation. And then maybe a few days later, try to remember exactly what the conversation was, who said what and in what order. Write it down or record it into video again. Then compare the two. And I tell you, the two will be different. You get the general gist of it, but it will be, they won't be the same. In fact, one of the ways investigators and good interrogators know when people are lying, or it's certainly a big tell, is when your story hangs together too well. Because they know people who are telling the truth get it wrong. They make mistakes. They remember things incorrectly. If you remember it absolutely spot on, with rare exception because you've got an eidetic memory, like me, it's very rare you will get it exactly right. And they know this. It's too good. It hangs together too well. Unlike the truth, lies have to make sense.
Yeah. And lies are polished. They're polished turds.
Yeah, exactly. So those 4 things, you got consistency, you got accountability, testability, measurability. And of course, the last one, as your business grows and you get good at this, because let's face it, it's a learned skill. I'll come to this in a minute, actually. It's teachability. You can teach it to someone else, hand it off. Here's the framework. Here's how you present it. Go away and do it. But here's the thing. When you start with your brand shiny new, we got a sales framework, as I call it, core control sales framework, sales call framework. We've got it in core control. It comes in at week 11. And it's bullet points. It's got highlights in it to show you why we're doing certain things. And it's a learned skill. And there's the whole raft of meaning in those words. It's a learned skill, because it means when you start doing it your first call, you're going to be shit at it. You're going to be constantly looking at what should I say next, and you perhaps fluff it and get it wrong. You might still make a sale, because what you also need to remember is the person you're speaking to doesn't know where you're going with this. It's a bit like when you're presenting on stage. You think, shit, I forgot an entire section of my presentation. Only you know that. Yeah. So you might do an imperfect presentation, still make a sale, but miss loads of stuff out. But you will start off really shit at it, because you know what? It's a learned skill. And the only way you'll ever get better at it is by getting it wrong and then doing better next time. Now, most people, what they'll do is, well, I'm no good at this, I'm not going to even try. So you'll never be good at it. You'll never be good at selling. The only way to become good at selling or any other learned skill is to practice that skill. And when you start practicing that skill, you will be bad at it. That's it. It's that simple as that. And this is a simple choice. This isn't a moral or an ethical dilemma. This is a simple matter of choices plus actions equal consequences. If you will not learn to sell, if you resolutely do not learn to sell because you think it's icky and it's wrong and there's a moral or ethical dilemma here, which there isn't, by the way, not if you're selling transformation like we do. If you won't learn to sell, that's fine. That's your choice. You still make sales because you'll get inbound marketing and people sometimes will just buy despite your ability, your lack of ability and lack of skill. But if you won't learn to sell, you will suffer the consequences. And right now, people are suffering the consequences. They're having dry work Januaries because they're just sitting there waiting for work to come in. They're not going out to get it and they're not going out selling it. Simple as that. I don't give a shit either way, really, because we are selling. We've had our best month this month for fucking ages, haven't we?
Yeah, because we got back to the basic of selling. I want to talk about, I'm not going to name them, but this person's been a client of ours for years. They've helped us quite a lot recently as well. One of them is the salesman for the company. And he has recently on the sales calls got a little bit arrogant and had been coming off script. And that tremendously hurt sales. So his business partner pulled him in and said, look, I've reviewed the recordings because all good salesmen review their recordings and said, I've noticed you're going off script a little bit. And he replied, yeah, I have. Been a mistake, hasn't it? And they went, yeah. So we agreed to stay to the framework. And guess what? Sales went up. And if we've got any businesses here that are at the point where they have salespeople or they're looking to hire salespeople, that same company have probably gone through 5 or so salesmen. They've finally found one this month that is any good. And I said to them, what's different? Because this person closed 2 programs, payment in full for 10K, which is more than any of the other salesmen have ever been able to do. So I said, what's different? Why is this one performing so well? Did you go somewhere else? And he went, no, I just got better at teaching sales. I said, how did you get better? He went, I stuck to the framework. I studied it. I understood every little bit. I've reviewed my recordings and we just taught them better. And I said, so you don't think this person's fundamentally a better salesperson? And they went, nope. We just were able to teach this person better. Going back to what you were saying about teachability, very important that you're sticking to your framework so you know what works, what doesn't work, why it doesn't work. Because when you get to the point of hiring salespeople, it's one of the most painful hires you'll ever make because you'll be sitting this person in front of prospects and every time they fucking blow it, you will want to rip their head off. There is no one more frustrating than the salesperson. And everyone blames the salesperson. Yeah, these guys, they do very fucking well. And they got rid of salesman after salesman, which is why they're on their 5th one. And it took them that long to look at themselves and go, perhaps we're not teaching it very well. Perhaps we need to revisit our frameworks. And as soon as they did that, in the first month, this salesman has outperformed every other salesman. If your salesmen are underperforming, it's on you to fix it. Don't blame your salespeople.
We teach this to our clients. We teach it in core control. We teach it elsewhere. We give them the framework. We don't sit down next to them on the desk. They'll have to pay a lot more for us to do that. But they get this and then they will get coached through it if they've got questions. There's no reason for any client of ours not to become great at sales. Now, I use this quote a lot. There's a video on YouTube by Gary Halbert, and it's the Ted Nicholas seminar, and it's Gary Halbert. Gary Halbert speaking, and in the first 3.5 minutes of this video, you could stop listening, take his advice, you could make $1 million quite easily from just this thing. And he says, I'm going to paraphrase it, he says, people have been coming up to me in the break asking me questions, and they're good questions. They're important questions. They're questions that at some point you need answering in your business. What mailing house should I use? Where should I advertise? What kind of credit card processor should I use? Lumpy mail or not? Those kinds of questions. And they're all good questions that need answering. But, they're the wrong question at this point. The real question is, if you measure success in business as 100, 99.9 of that 100 is actually fucking selling something. And until you can sell something, the rest, it doesn't matter what you do. And I'd say the same to anyone listening to this. Most people listening to this are going to be, some will be struggling, Others will be just frustrated in the feast and famine. And that's very common at the moment. And nearly everyone is going to be suffering in some way, shape, or form from the recession. All right. They're going to see a slowdown in sales. The only way out of it is to take control of your business and learn to sell. That's it. Our guys and girls are not struggling. Some are doing better than others. That's always going to be the case. But no, we've got an accountant. His fees are 10 times the going rate in the industry, and he's got a waiting list for his services. We've got a coach who's I think her hourly rate is like 250 quid or something stupid like that. Most of her competitors are probably looking at 40, 50 quid an hour. We've got a guy who's just increased his prices, I said, by 44.4%, 44.44 recurring percent. Closed every single fucking call, every sale. No longer does free calls, so he gets paid up front for the call anyway. He's had his most financially beneficial month ever in January, in the depths of a biting, probably the hardest recession that anyone's ever going to go through in their lives, because this is going to be a real cunt. None of this is coincidental. It's because they learn our stuff and they learn to sell.
Anyone that says, oh, natural born salesman, just shut up, you numpty. That's an excuse. Sales is a learned skill. Once you've learned it, studied it, build yourself a framework. I guarantee you, just building that framework will automatically increase your close rate.